We built a bunch of tanks on production design. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's real. But it was in a book.
Most brutal swap test I've done in my life was in the army. Most tank crew are partially hard of hearing because the decibel levels are so loud. If you're within 30 meters of the tank, do not make the mistake of letting your ear face the tank. Look at it straight because you might burst your eardrum.
If you've been through a war, you will never want war ever.
Ishaan, Soni ma'am, Raja, welcome to the Hindu. I started on a lighter note. I was catching the film. I'm going to ask a question verbatim that he asks a character in the film. Just what the hell is an anal odyssey?
How did you get that?
It's a journey no one wants to take.
I'm sure there are takers.
It's not gonna.
Right, it'll make sense when you guys watch the film. Right. Is this part of like any kind of a parlance? Like, did you catch it from somewhere? Like,
Yeah. It is. I mean, I think it is used in an army story somewhere that I read.
you there?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's real. But it was in a book. I kind of like the idea of that.
Right. Ishaan, talk to me a bit about the boot camp that you went through in preparation of this film.
We had two of them. We had the first one we had was early on. It was in the midst of the pandemic, so we had to do multiple tests to be eligible. First of all, something I've never mentioned actually in any of the of these interviews or talking about this film is the most brutal nasal, swab test I've done in my life was in the army because I think, and rightly so, but brutal to enter. I mean, he knows, he's felt it. I think the resetting of my mind to become a Fauji began with that swab going up and pressing a button in my brain.
Yeah, Suratgarh. They really went to the brain.
No, but jokes apart, it was probably one of the most invaluable experiences of my life. Suratgarh was the first boot camp. We were there for about 7 days. There were 7-8 of us. They put us through the ringer. The night we arrived there, we had a few hours of sleep and we started immediately the next morning at 4 a.m. We would go through PT, drills, learning the salutes, march past, to map reading, to all kinds of work. We worked with the machinery. We learned how to navigate a tank. We learned about the PD-76 tank specifically, which even they had to pull out the experts because it's such an old tank. So we trained with the tank. They would take us to the desert. We would do drills with the tank. And then a few months before we began filming, we had another workshop in Ahmednagar where we witnessed for the first time live firing, tank firing. And I don't know if have you ever witnessed a live tank firing? Your chest comes out of your skin, man. Like it's you feel it first and then you hear it. And one fact is that most tank crew are partially hard of hearing. Because the decibel levels are so loud. The first thing they told us was if you're within 30 meters of the tank, do not make the mistake of letting your ear face the tank. Look at it straight. And might be scary at first, first experience, but look straight at it. Don't do that because you might burst your eardrum. So it's a lot, and we got to actually sit in a commander's seat to experience firing, which is I think a first for any civilian. So it was a huge privilege. It just makes your body ready for it. You just understand what it means to be in these situations, and it takes a lot of training and a lot of resolve and great.
Do they at all care that here are sweet-faced actors who are coming, and the regime that you'll be put through will be maybe a little softer compared to what actual Jawan?
He'll answer that for you. He'll answer that for you.
So when I decided this and I told these guys that they were going to do it, I was very pleasantly surprised that they were actually excited. And I was like, they don't know what they're going to get. It's great. And then I spoke with the commanding officer there, and they were like, this is tough. We're going to. It's not easy. First of all, you're giving us 14 days, and secondly, that means either we're going to drill the hell out of these guys, but they're actors. Maybe we shouldn't. And I said, you know what? I don't care. I don't care if they come back. if they come back, they come back soldiers.
Okay.
And so no, that was not true.
Okay,
I did get that
I
they
made
came
it
back. But it was amazing. In fact, the story that to me really got me scared was when they called me one day and said, "Hey guys, last night we were taken to it was 5 degrees in Suratgarh, Rajasthan. They were taken into the desert in this tank and made to stay overnight there, and it was late in the night, and they said, the enemy could come at any point in time, you have to be awake, and he's like a first bencher when it comes to these things, so he's taking it all really seriously, right? and they're all sitting in the tanks, and they're there, it's cold as hell, and normally the tank is warm because it's run, except this tank has not run anywhere, so it's cold, right? They don't have a blanket, it's 5 degrees, and then they've not had dinner, and they ask for dinner, and so they're given dal, not cooked dal,
for lunch.
Raw dal for lunch. They're given raw dal, they're given raw rice, and given a live chicken and said, make your dinner, lunch, right? And so, I mean, that was the training.
Right.
Yeah, so they went through it.
Fascinating.
It's beautiful that they did. I mean, I'm very thankful, always very thankful.
Thank you.
So now I'll get you in here. There's a very resonant and lovely moment in the film where initially Ishaan talks about, rather dismissively, that, because of the Bangladesh war, a huge influx of refugees have entered India, and you counter it by saying that we are refugees too. We moved after the partition from Rawalpindi to India. Talk to me about that sentiment, and what do you feel about that bit of writing, because it kind of speaks to a larger reality of people and displacement, and our subcontinent is riven with stories.
Absolutely, and partition, because of partition, I believe, I know for a fact, because I've read a lot about it, that a huge displacement happened on both sides, and people lost everything overnight. But it's a little more personal for me, because you can be displaced anywhere in the world, right? My mother originally comes from Berlin, and during the Second World War, they were thrown out of Germany. Actually, they were not thrown out, they had to sneak out of Germany because her father was running an underground newspaper against Hitler. So he's basically on the side of, against the Nazis. So they found out and they put him in jail. So they had to leave and flee. And my mother and her mother had to flee Germany. Now it's a long story, I won't get into it here, but I know that they were also political refugees.
Okay.
So my mom is, I've had that experience, and I've lived with my grandmother as well in the UK when they left. They went finally to the UK. So I know what it means to be displaced because of my own family. And my mom used to always tell me, she says, if you've been through a war, you will never want war, ever.
And to give you that, actually, that's the scene. I was talking about it earlier, and I had a certain way in which I believed the lines were written. And so when we were talking about it, and we discussed it for a long time, and when we were on set, Soni ji came to me and said, can I do this a little differently? And I said, of course you can. Tell me what it's going to be. And she said, I'd like to take a softer approach.
Yeah.
And explain it as against make it a more bombastic. Do you know what we are also? And I said, go for it. I think it really elevates that statement. It makes it emotional. It makes it true. Because at that point in time, she explained to me this story about where it came from.
I'll bring on point, and all three of us can answer. We've seen a streak in our war films or military films where we do tend to get a bit hyper. Let's say the tone gets jingoistic. It gets very hyper militaristic. A kind of religious tonality is added to military realities, things like that. I found Pippa more even-tempered in that regard. Was that a conscious decision to make a film that that's more dignified, that's more restrained in its approach of telling ultimately a patriotic story?
More in its reality. I don't think patriotism is, like Ishaan has said before, it's not about hating somebody, it's about loving what you love, and they're two different emotions. And I think that war has a healthy respect. In war, both sides really do respect each other. They understand they're doing a job. They're not out there for personal vendetta. When you're fighting a battle, you're fighting a battle for a higher purpose or a reason. But when you're there in the middle of it, there's respect for each other. And so I find it very odd when I hear these blood-curdling, chants of going and killing people. Nobody wants to kill anybody. Trust me. There's a book called Humankind. If you ever get a chance to read it, you should read it. It talks about human beings. We don't want to kill anybody, really. We are traumatized. PTSD comes from that.
Okay.
So that's the idea of it. But for me, war and a military exercise has to have higher purpose. And the higher purpose is liberating Bangladesh in this case. And so that's what we focused on, and the reality of it. It's not hyper anything, because reality is not hyper anything. And there's so much drama and emotion without needing to go into that place. At least that's our belief, I think, as a unit.
Ishaan, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's an inherent part of this story. I don't think we took that approach to the story in the sense that it was an outside force being forced into this. It was the story. 45 Cavalry as a unit itself is probably the most liberal and what's the word for
Secular.
involving?
Secular.
Yeah, not just secular.
OIC.
It's
So-
it's the only unit with OICs, so
OICs,
all Indian classes, other Indian classes, and so they all worked together. So they knew that the ultimate enemy was not a sect or a people; it was a belief, or it was, it was the act of atrocity and genocide, and that's what we fought against. And I think it's. Of course, we had refugees, we had a refugee problem. Of course, we were fighting for many reasons, and politics are politics. But I think this is as noble or selfless cause for which you can fight a war. And the testament to that is the fact that we fought this war, one of the shortest wars in history because of our skill and strategy. 13 days, we helped liberate a nation. We helped the Mukti Bahini and the Bangla people gain autonomous, status, and then we left, which is testament to the fact that we did this for a higher purpose, and not for personal gain.
So I'll get you in just to build on this. You starred in a beautiful film called Razi also, right? And that's one of those films that I'm talking about. Someone had written very poignantly about how Razi looks at both sides of the story, and the Pakistani family that we see there is very cultured. Vicky's character listens to music. It's a very atypical way of how we traditionally have had very rather caricaturish portrayal of Pakistani army men. What do you have to say on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I loved most about Razi, is this fact that it was a human story at the end of the day. And obviously, whichever country you live in, you're going to be on the side of that country.
Yeah.
So that's just a given, right? And that doesn't mean you're a bad person because you're on the other side. It just means that you're on the side of what country you're born in and you live in. So it's just as simple as that.
Right. Tell me a little bit about recreating the PT-76 and like Ishaan said, these are old tanks. What was the challenge of making them like functional vehicles, on a film set?
So first of all, the biggest challenge was actually shooting a film with a tank that didn't really exist anymore. But luckily for us, the army and Brigadier Balram Singh Mehta came together and found us one PT that still existed in Suratgarh, except it didn't run. And so it took us about 8 months to get it up and running. Not us, the MES in Meerut, and we kept going through tests. And the first time we water tested it, they were very clear. They said, we strongly believe it may not swim. Right? And I was like, okay, let's not test it where it can sink. Right? Because that's all we had. And so it was a very slow process, but once it swam, that's when we said, okay, we can do this. We still didn't have a clue whether it would swim enough for us to put it through the ringer, right? To shoot is not easy. We did that. We had an incredible team of people we built a bunch of tanks on production design. And then we had, a guy, Ravi, who built the tanks, the actual shells. And then Mustafa, who kind of made them kind of worthy of running. And then Ninad was our grip. And then a gentleman called Firoz who came in to make it waterworthy. Right. And so it was a phenomenal, exciting process for us. Just from an engineering, it was like playing with those mechanos. I don't know if you ever remember, we used to have these building things when we were kids, mechano, we'd build bridges. It was like that for me, right? Just sitting there watching these phenomenal guys come in with all their engineering skills and then make this thing. And the first time it floated, I remember when we made our things, it was just, it was like...
We have a movie.
Yeah, and also, it's like the first time you see the chute come out, when you put a seed inside, then you say, oh my God, okay, it's unbelievable, right? So for me, this film has more than all of the great things that we have. This is one more element of it, just the possibilities that one can do with, if you put your mind to it, and you stop doubting and making justifications for why we don't make certain kind of films. Now I feel we can do anything.
I'll also add to that, not just the fact that we resurrected this machine. We had Mondal Saab, I would give big shout out to Mondal Saab, who drove the real PT-76 in the entire film. So all the tank action that you're seeing, he's driving. And the last shot that we did of the film, in a very, it was like
Poignant.
Providence,
Yeah.
in a poignant, incident that happened. I was on the tank in the water, and we were just doing a travel shot, and we knew that was our last shot with the tank, and the hull of the tank blew up, and literally fire started to emerge from it, and black smoke started to come out, and I just heard a lot of screaming, and they said cut on the PA system. I looked, and they were freaking out because I was on the tank, and we managed to somehow get the tank back onto land. And Mondal Saab came out and he said, "Ke iska to ho gaya." The tank came alive for us to make the movie, and you'll get to see the movie with the real Pippa. And then it decided to go to sleep
And
again.
and Mondal Saab, I mean, really big shout out to Mondal sir, because he's 70 years old and he drove this tank like a beast for the entire schedule. He was manic. He is the star.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Right.
Thanks. I think we all got a little excited. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, guys. All the best for Pippa.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.